Why do franchises fail? On the surface, franchising looks like one of the safest bets in business. Thousands of brands, hundreds of thousands of owners, and billions added to the U.S. economy every year. Yet not every franchise is created equal. Some disappear quietly, others collapse in the spotlight, and the reasons aren't always what you expect. In today's episode, we're pulling back the curtain on the real cause behind franchise failures and how to spot warning signs before you invest.
Trying to reach my goals, got no time for mistakes. Yeah, I'm standing on business, need a big safe. Suited up, got the blueprint in the briefcase. It's go time on the grind, these are big stakes.
Broadcasting from the Franchise Sidekick studio, welcome to the Sidekick Life. Get ready for stories of passion, problem solvings, and success from those living life on their terms. All right, Tyler, we are back and at it again for another episode of the Sidekick Life. And today we are talking about why franchises fail, right? I think there's a lot of misinformation out there around what this really is, and we are going to dive in. So first, let me make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about. When we say why franchises fail, we're not talking about the independent or the local franchisee that owns a business in your market. We are talking about franchisors. So franchisor meaning a person or a group that puts together a business model, kind of a blueprint around a business model that they feel can be repeated around a part of the country or all of the country. And what we hear often in this industry is that when you look at all of the FDDs, which are the documents that govern franchise brands, when you look at all of them, about 300 new franchise brands are created every year, which means they create a new FDD that didn't exist before, right, for a brand. And about 300 fail. Now, I think that is a little misleading, though, because when they say about 300 fail, what they really mean is 300 franchise brands that had previously filed an FDD that decided not to file a new one for that year, right? Right. Trending so far? Yep. So the reason I feel that's a little bit misleading is because that many of those brands may have never really got off the ground as a franchise anyway, right? Are you really a franchisor if you don't have franchisees yet? My vote would be no, you're not. Or they may just be a very small, maybe they only have one or two or three or just a small number of franchisees that were kind of their testing ground. They realized it didn't work and they decided not to spend the money to file an FDD again next year. And a lot of those independents those people would then just probably go independent and operate not under the franchise flag or not with a franchisor supporting them. But, these are very, very small or non-existent franchisors that had nothing but legal paperwork usually. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's level set for a second, because I think people are always surprised. When I work with a client, they're surprised how big the franchising industry is. So let's level set this for a second. So there's a franchise in America that opens every 8 minutes. That's how big and how fast this industry is growing. There's 800,000 locations. It's an $800 billion industry in America. And there are some industries like QSR, it's 50% of overall market share. So it's a massive industry. So I think sometimes people get confused around how big this industry is. And for a couple franchise brands, maybe not to be successful, or maybe they're just trying franchising. And like you said, they don't refile their FTD. It is misleading to an extent, but this is a huge market in America.
Yep. And a heavy majority of the brands that file FDDs file again next year. I mean, we're probably talking, call it, I would say between 5 and 7% of brands that previously had an FDD that don't file again. But I don't want this to be a question of the franchise model in general. While we don't have specifics around why franchise brands may not file FDDs again the next year or fail, for me, when I look at franchising, we may not have the statistics on businesses that work under a franchise versus that don't. But just like we don't have statistics on if you drive a motorcycle and you wear a helmet, I don't know how many people survived because they were wearing a helmet, but I inherently know that you're safer if you got a helmet on. More people survive because of helmets. I just don't know how many. Just like more businesses survive under a franchise, I just don't know how many. But it's still an important question to ask as to why do they fail when they do, so we can better understand and have less of them, right?
In general, we do know businesses typically will fail. The success rate of overall business industry is pretty staggering. It's like 90% fail after 5 years. And so we do know that there's a lot of independent businesses that will start, people do their own thing, and it doesn't work out. So like you said, we may not know all the scope of statistics here on this, but we also know that like riding a bicycle or a motorcycle, helmet as a franchise is usually going to be better.
Yeah, so let's put these into 3 buckets, right? I want to take national brands, no specific number that a national brand needs outside of just brands that you would probably recognize. And then I want to take what I'll call emerging or regional brands. These are ones that actually have some momentum. They've got some franchisees. Things are moving forward. And then I've got just that bucket that we already talked about of those brands that never really got off the ground. I'm going to take these brands that never got off the ground. I'm just going to push them to the side. We're not going to talk about those. Those are brands that never had momentum, never were really proven anyway. But let's start with national brands, because these are the ones that make the headlines. These are the ones that potentially when somebody sees a Quiznos or a Blimpies decrease, they say, whoa, what's going on with the franchise model? And so just to use those two and one other as an example, take Quiznos, right? We've heard the Quiznos story. They were 5,000 locations strong at one point. Today, I believe they're 150-ish, right? Blimpies, a sandwich that I love. I actually really think Blimpies is great. They were 2,000 locations at one point, and now they're around 100. Or Boston Market Chicken. They were over 1,000 units at one time. Today, I think they're like less than 30, right? These are massive, monumental, headlining failures. So before I get into my feelings as to why those three examples specifically failed, what are your thoughts?
Well, inherently, Ryan, these are food concepts, right? Like that's a whole nother ball of wax. I mean, this is very hard. If you have 5,000 locations of a food concept, it's hard to move the ship in terms of different marketing or just whatever is happening. People's tastes change sometimes. So that inherently stands out. But oversaturation is another part of it. But I know you got some thoughts around these specific brands also.
Yeah, these specific brands I do have thoughts on. But the point I want to make first is if you're a national brand and you have this type of failure, it's leadership, right? It is specifically leadership, in my opinion. I mean, non-food concepts, non-franchise also, but Blockbuster, Peloton, Kodak. I mean, we've seen companies have massive falls, and because they just didn't see the market shift that was happening. Now, when we look at, let's take Quiznos, for instance. Quiznos was greed, right? There is, let's not sugarcoat this. There is a challenge in franchising that if you ever get with misguided leadership, that's a problem. And that's what happened with Quiznos. They were greedy. They started to squeeze franchisees in pricing. And so you need to flush that out in due diligence. You need to understand who leadership is. Blimpies. I think Blimpies had rapid expansion and they were choosing B locations. Well, what happens when you're a food concept and you choose a B location? Your competitor is going to go choose that A location, right? And so when customers can pull right up off the main drag, right in to get a sandwich, they're not going to drive around a corner, take a left at the stoplight and go around, whatever to get to you. So Blimpies just made a poor decision in real estate, something, again, that needs to be flushed out in the due diligence process. Boston Market, they were trendy. People loved rotisserie chicken, and then all of a sudden they started to see competitors that were more like chicken fingers, quick chicken sandwiches, and Boston Market got out-positioned. All of those, in my opinion, are leaders not seeing what's going on or not understanding what it takes to have franchisee success. I know Subway has had some of this. They've continued to try to reinvent themselves. They've had some good, they've had some bad. They're a national brand, though, and at least their leaders are continuing to try things to understand whether or not the customers like them. So while they might see a decline in restaurants, they're a national brand that's not going away. It still has plenty of opportunities as a franchisee.
Yeah, and I want to hit on something. So you said greed, and something you brought up there is if you are a prospective franchisee, you're looking at possibly buying a food concept or any concept that requires the franchisor to supply products, there's something there to consider, right? Because it could be a huge advantage for you, but even Cold Stone was in this boat too. Cold Stone, same thing. They started to overcharge their franchisees. So how do you feel about that? Like, is that something as a prospective franchisee you should consider as a pro or a negative?
A pro or negative, meaning that, explain your question again. I don't know.
Yeah, they're supplying the products, right? So as a franchisor, you're supplying the products. They're obviously getting discounted products, but how do you view that as a pro or a negative or something you should be concerned about?
I think it's a pro because if you have proprietary products that can't be found anywhere else, I've experienced that myself back in the nutrition world. When we had our own products that were priced appropriately, that worked, it was a massive strategic advantage. But again, this is why franchisors and franchisees need to be aligned, because if franchisors are only thinking about the margins that they make as opposed to the strategic advantage that it's going to offer franchisees, the price points for franchisees, then the misalignment is going to be a problem. How do you solve that? One, there's probably language in the contract that dictates some terms that are allowed around product sales. They disclose margins in many cases, especially around what they spend in marketing and things like that, or how much money they made on required products in the FDD. The other, which I think is maybe the most important, is having a really closely aligned franchise advisory council, right? Joining a franchise franchise brand or pushing to have a franchise brand start with an advisory council. In my franchisor days, it was one of the most effective things we did when we brought franchisees in, a couple of times a month and said, here's what we're thinking about in product development. Here's what it's going to, here's what we would have to charge you for it. Does that work? So many times they would say, no, it doesn't. And then we'd look at our cost and say, well, it doesn't make sense for us to bring it in then. Or other times they would say, that's great. Or can we adjust the product and bring the price down a little bit? So when those conversations are happening between franchisor and franchisee, it's where the magic happens.
That's fantastic insight. So anybody thinking about franchise where, once again, the franchisor supplies the products, huge win if aligned correctly, like you said.
Yep. Now, here's the other thing. We're spending a lot of time talking about national brands. Very few people who are considering, that's the wrong way to position it. It's difficult to get into national brands, right? And so if you wanted to go get into a McDonald's or a Jimmy John's or, brands of those caliber, it's so difficult. Existing franchisees are going to buy more. There's no more territory. I don't want to say it's nearly impossible to get in, but the number of people, if you asked, hey, would you be interested in buying a McDonald's, would say yes, compared to those that can actually buy it, is a fraction of that, right? So that's why I want to spend the majority of our time talking not about the national brands that very few people are going to get into and have a failure, but instead the emerging brands, because these are the ones that feel a little bit more like, okay, they're smaller. Who are the leaders behind it? What is their market position? Do they have a future or don't they? And honestly, it's why we exist. We want to spend some time today, and especially at the end of this podcast, talking about how we help people avoid this. But these are the ones that I really want to dive into, the red flags to say, how do you know an emerging brand is going to work, or why do they fail?
And just to summarize what you just said there, there's a huge upside in these emerging brands. So if you're going to buy a McDonald's, you're going to pay. If somebody got in 20 years ago, they built that location, it's obviously got cash flow. You're going to pay for that cash flow. The upside on these emerging ones is that difference between the maturity and when you get in. Yeah. So that's a huge upside for the prospective franchisee.
Yeah. Also the cost. I mean, when you look at some I'm an Orange Theory franchisee. We've done very well with our Orange Theories. I've been very happy as a franchisee there. But would I open one today? I don't know. It's the cost is much higher than it used to be. When I got in, I think they were $600,000-$700,000 to get in per location, and I think they're easily 1.2 today. That's tricky, and I get it. You're a franchisor. You want to continue to boost the experience. You want to make it better, but that's tricky. All right, let's talk about emerging brands. Number one thing I think is really challenging for emerging brands is they franchise too early, right? You've got somebody who's got a local or a regional business. They've been operating it themselves, and they say, I think this could be a franchise. And they go too early. They go before they really understand if other people can operate that model effectively. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think too early is very subjective, and I agree with you. So a couple things that I'm looking at if I'm considering a franchise concept is geography. Have they actually been outside of that region or state? We're going to talk about licensing and things, but you have to make sure that it's just not like that brand equity within a small amount of area. Denver, for example, I'm in Fort Collins. Denver, there's a lot of really cool restaurant concepts or concepts down there. They have brand equity that they have built in that area. If you extend beyond that, what's that look like? If it's not been tested, it could be very problematic for a franchisee in Florida, in Kansas, in Texas. So the geography behind it is very, very important.
Yeah, the most important thing you said there is, has it been tested, right? And that's exactly what I mean when I say too early. So oftentimes when I have people who own businesses that say, I want to get a franchise, what is your advice? I say, find an employee, find a family member, have them open another location within a couple of hours so you can be there if they need you, and start testing that way. Once that works, then go find somebody another couple hours away that doesn't have any experience with your business and see if that works. Those are the two major tests that I want to see before I would consider a franchise. Has a previous employee or somebody that understands the business gone out and done it as a franchisee, and has somebody that didn't have previous experience with that business gone out and done it? If they've checked those two boxes, I'm feeling a heck of a lot better. Like, okay, maybe there's a chance that this thing can be repeatable for other people.
And it tests how important that concept is to the original founder. We've seen this before too, where you have this really cool concept, this great charismatic founder, and all of a sudden you give it to somebody else who's not as charismatic, doesn't want to network or whatever. And we're like, oh, that's a problem, right? So it also tests that theory, how dependent this concept is on the original founder.
Yeah, you got it. And kind of perpetuating, maybe, I don't want to call it this problem because it's not a massive problem, but it happens, are these franchise creators. Now, this is a need in the business, and there's some that do it very well, right? My buddy Steve Beagleman over at SMB, he does this fantastic. He's very good, very responsible at doing this. There are others, what I mean by franchise creators are companies that say, hey, you own a local business. you should turn that into a franchise. Just pay me this amount of money and I'm going to build your documents and all these things. And then they're going to hand you over this FDD and this operations manual, and they're going to say, good luck, right? The operations manual and the FDD are not really the challenging part. The challenging part is, how do I find qualified people to open this business? What's the amount of working capital? How am I going to get customers in other markets? Who's going to guide and coach me on how to be an effective franchisor? And as I can go through those tests. So I think sometimes franchise creators could potentially express the importance of those testing things and what happens after you have your documents made.
I mean, because in reality, it's pretty easy to create. You mentioned this. It's easy to create a franchise, right? Like you just said it. You're going to build an FDD. You're going to do some operations manuals, maybe, and you've got a franchise technically. So that goes back to the original problem we talked about, people not renewing those FDDs. It's pretty simple to do.
Hey, Sidekicks, it's Ryan Zink here. I'll never forget the moment I opened my first franchise, helping my first customer, hiring my first employee, and cashing my first check. It wasn't just a business, it was the beginning of living life on my terms. When Tyler and I started Franchise Sidekick, we reimagined how people would find brands and succeed in franchise ownership. We're the fastest growing franchise advisory group in the country because we built a smarter, tech-driven system. Our approach has helped people just like you purchase over 10,000 franchise locations, and we've earned a 5-star rating on Google doing it. Now we're sharing exactly how we do it in a quick 20-minute webinar titled 10,000 Locations and Counting, the Franchise Buyer's Blueprint. If you're ready to explore a path to financial freedom and take control over your future, this is your first step. And did I mention our services are always 100% free? Click the link below to sign up now because you deserve to live life on your terms. Yep, good. Okay, number 2. One of my favorite quotes from my man Jim Collins from Good to Great is face the brutal facts, right? I tell you, I've talked to lots of emerging franchisors that are looking to use our services or looking to use my previous company's services, and I kind of had to tell them their baby was ugly. And they just won't believe it, right? They just are like, no, my baby is not ugly. My baby is beautiful, meaning this can be a franchise. And, I specifically remember one guy, I'm talking to him and he's like, yeah, we've got a pretty good model. It's about $350,000 to get open and a franchisee can make $60,000 a year if they work it themselves. And I'm like, oh, okay. Are they paying themselves on top of that? No, they can't pay themselves. Nobody wants to spend $300,000+ to go make that. They've bought themselves a job, probably something that they're never going to be able to sell for any kind of profit. And we need to have a foreseeable exit in a business for it to make sense. And so sometimes franchisors, I think, just aren't facing the brutal facts on whether or not it can survive as a franchise.
Yeah. Most of them are going to be copycat concepts too. They're not something original, or sometimes they have something original that nobody wants or needs. That's the other side of it too. And it could have been a geography thing, or like they found this little niche in their market. It's going really well, but like you can't scale that up. To your point, the economics have to make sense. You can't just assume somebody's going to give you $300,000. You're going to make $60K a year. So we've had the other side of it though. We've had these concepts come to us, and all of a sudden, like, there's something there, right? It's a kind of a surprise. Like, wow, we thought this was niche, but it's actually a fantastic concept.
Yeah, if we were doing a podcast on why franchisors succeed, this would be an entirely different conversation. We see plenty of emerging franchisors that line up all the things that you need to be successful, but we're talking today about why they fail. And I think oftentimes it's because the franchisor may not face the brutal facts, right? What is your unique selling proposition? Because you said it already. A lot of times you're going to be in an industry that's already existing. Every year I might see less than 5 new concepts I haven't seen before in franchising, which means a heavy majority of them are just repurposing a business that already exists. They're trying to position it in a new way. So what's the reason to believe? What's the unique selling proposition, right? What are the financials on a business that's not run by you, founder, one that you've built for the last 20 years with your blood, sweat, and tears, and now somebody wants to go do it in a market and they're going to rely on you? Well, guess what? Is their revenue the same? Can they support the type of expenses that you're proposing they are going to have? Can they acquire customers? Do you remember what it was like as a founder to acquire customers in the beginning of your business if you've been 10 or 15 years into it, right? Facing the brutal facts, and it's why, we already talked about it, those tests with people that you know and trust and know your business first are so important, because you're going to learn a lot when they go out there and do it again for the first time.
100%. If we've been talking about make sure all this is together, and they've been doing it for a while, they've tested outside geography. Like, from a time perspective, Ryan, like, when would you feel comfortable thinking about, I'm ready to invest in this franchise brand because they have done XXX locations, or they've been outside of the geography for so many years? When do you think that sweet spot is? And it's a little subjective, I know, but what's your personal opinion?
It's very subjective. So I'm gonna bucket it in 2 ways. One, I'm gonna say I would go very early with an experienced franchise leader, right? And I'll give you an example. A buddy of mine has started up a driving concept here in town. He's got a ton of experience as a franchisor. He's done it before. He knows what it takes. He's got franchisee success on his mind, and he's young, and I absolutely would invest into that concept because he's done it before, right? Now, if it's somebody brand new to franchising, they haven't done it before, I'm going to want to see a test of, I don't know, a half dozen locations probably first. And if I'm part of the first half dozen locations, then I might be looking for some concessions. I might be saying, hey, I am a pioneer of your brand. Would you consider potentially a lower investment, a lower royalty, the ability to get out without penalty, right? Those first 6 franchisees are just as valuable to the franchisor as the franchisor is to those early franchisees. And so I'm putting it in 2 buckets: experienced versus non-experienced franchise leaders.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great. Let's talk on leaders for a second, because I know you got this path you want to go down, but I love the idea of talking about leaders because they are so important to this overall concept. So if you are investing into a franchise brand, that leader is extremely important. Primarily because they're going to dictate the future of you and a lot of other franchisees. Are there any red flags, like you mentioned, not enough experience, other red flags that people should be considered around like looking at other leaders?
Yeah, if that leader is still going to operate their own business in that category. So for instance, we run into it all the time. Somebody's been operating a business for an extended number of years, right? And if they're not a franchise, where do they spend their time? They spend their time operating their business. So that's all they know. They know how to run their dry cleaner or their fitness concept or their ice cream or their restoration or whatever it is. And now they're going to move into becoming a franchisor. And if that leader just gravitates back to just continuing to run their business, that's misaligned expectations. There is something wrong there. That leader needs somebody on their team, or they themselves need to make a massive commitment to say, I've got leadership in place for my existing business. I'm now taking all of the experience that I have, all of the years that I have, and I'm going to go coach others on how to do this. And I'm going to spend all of my time doing that. If I run into any founders that say, yeah, I've been running this business for 10 years and I'm going to continue to do that, but we're going to have franchisees over here and I'm going to take one of my managers and put them in charge of that, it's a problem. It's a problem until you've proven it to me, because you are the product. Until the system has been proven over multiple franchisees, you, Mr. or Mrs. Founder, who have been running that business, are the product to coach those people into success. And again, these are the types of things that we vet out. So when our clients are looking at franchises, we can give them an exact idea of what the leadership is like. In fact, we even run a little bit of a report through the FDD to tell them this is what we think of leadership.
That's fantastic. All right. Good insight.
Yep, you got it. Well, and it's a little bit of a segue into the second reason I believe that emerging franchisors could fail, and it's misaligned expectations, right? When an emerging franchisor is asked to put together their initial legal documents, they are asked to do it in a way to say, what do you think it's going to cost to start this, right? How do you think customers are going to be acquired? How much time does the franchisee need to put in? What are the expectations of that person, et cetera? And many times, I'm talking micro emerging, very small franchisor, many times those are best guesses, which is the way I would do it. If I started a franchise tomorrow, I would have to give my best guesses. Now, what happens is if you scale against best guesses and you find out that those best guesses are wrong, you now have frustrated franchisees because there are surprises, right? Mm-hmm. And so you need to spend some time, again, it's why the tests are so important, spend some time understanding, are my startup costs correct? Are they going to be the same in Des Moines, Iowa as they are in Fort Lauderdale, Florida? Most likely no. So let's make sure that we dictate that correctly in the documents. What about ownership type? There's plenty of franchise brands that could be run part-time, and there's lots of them that can't. And so how do we make sure that we've got aligned expectations on what the leader's going to have to put in? Client acquisition, obviously financials, people trying to understand, like, if I'm going to borrow money, put in working capital, put in time, what is an expected return? Lots of misaligned expectations can hurt emerging franchisors. That's why my advice is typically be ultra conservative. Right? Yeah. Put too much money in the startup. Put the estimates too high in the startup cost. So if anything, it's going to be less than that. Say it's a full-time franchise opportunity, and if somebody can do it for less or for part-time, they're going to feel good about it. Say client acquisition is going to be twice as much as you think it's going to be. If you start that way, then you're going to do nothing but surprise and delight franchisees in the positive way. It's if your early franchisees are frustrated in the negative way that you're going to run into problems.
Yeah. And if you're a prospective franchisee listening to this is what we do all the time, right? So here's how we combat this for our clients. it's franchisee validation. Now, to Ryan's point, if you're early in on this concept, there may not be a lot of validation, but what franchisee validation is, we're getting you in contact with existing franchisees and we're coaching you on what questions to ask. So we have a whole bunch of resources here to help you ask the right questions, because that's right there, the number one. What did this cost to build? Was it in alignment with the item 7 in the FTD? How easy is it to get customers? All of this stuff plays in the validation that we coach our clients on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Now that we're partway into this episode, I'm kind of like, man, I wish we would have titled it "Why They Win and Why They, why they Succeed and Why They Fail." I feel like we're sort of painting this failure picture, and that's not the case. We're talking about a smaller percentage of franchise brands. The majority of franchise brands, especially the ones that we are familiar with and show to clients, are the ones that have the characteristics to succeed. But that's why it's important to have an insider. That's why it's important to have somebody that looks at these things all day, every day, and understands which ones are going to work. Because I promise you, if you throw a dart at a dartboard at 4,000 different franchise brands because you like their ice cream or their dry cleaner is close to your home, that's probably not a winning formula, right? You need to have a checklist and lots of things that you go through to understand if it's going to meet your needs and be successful.
You got it.
Okay, growth. So here's the interesting thing, especially for some of these new categories, right? Somebody shows up and they say, I've got the next big thing in franchising, and it starts to move. And when it starts to move, then other people are saying, why is that brand growing? I don't want to miss out. Is this the next big thing? And a lot of people jump in, which is cool. I mean, don't get me wrong. We are part of fast growing franchise brands. But if it's a fast-growing franchise brand that hasn't checked specific boxes on how they're going to support growth, then we really got some challenges for people. And so, for instance, if it's a retail concept, we really want to dig into what is the development schedule for franchisees, right? If I see a development schedule where somebody says, if you buy 2 or 3 of these, you have to open every one in between 8 and 12 months, it's usually a bit of a red flag for me, because I don't want franchisees moving into a second location until number 1 is super stable. I don't want them moving into 3 until 2 is stable, right? So we look at development schedules. We look at build-out costs. We go back and talk to franchisees and ask if those are correct. We try to understand if this is going to be a type of, let's say, food or service that is only available in warm weather, or food that's only enjoyed in certain parts of the region, right? We've got a whole checklist that we try to understand. Is this something that can not only scale and be exciting, but also be supportive of a lot of franchisees? What are your thoughts on growth?
This one's brutal because, and just so everyone's clear on this, what this is, when you go to sign your franchise agreement, you're going to sign a commitment to open up these locations in a set time period, right? So if you buy 3 locations, franchisor is going to be, like Ryan said, open them every 9 months, 12 months, whatever you guys decide on. And then you are relegated to opening those locations in that time frame. This can put a lot of strain on a couple things, right? If it is a short time frame, 6-9 months, you're going to get that location open. 6 months of owning a business is nothing. It's like having a child, and your child is 6 months old. You're still trying to figure things out, right? So then you have to turn around and open another location, get leases signed. All of this stuff has to happen, and it drains your cash flow. Your bank may be saying, hey, your financials aren't correct. We're going to back out of the second location. Then your franchisor is saying, hey, you said I'm going to open this location. You got to do it. If the franchisor won't budge with that, that's a huge problem, causes conflict between the franchisee and the franchisor, and can drain your cash flow and really your business, tank your business.
Yeah. And it's short-sighted. Any franchisor that is forcing franchisees to open locations before they're ready is extremely short-sighted, because none of those are going to be on stable ground, and everybody's going to have problems in the future. So again,
and the reason they're doing it, just to touch on that, the reason they're doing it is because they want to sell that location, right? So they may say, if you're not going to open it, I'm going to take it away from you and I'm going to resell it, which is a problem, because especially if it's like a protected territory, and 3 months or 3 miles down the road, you now have a location that opens up to compete with you. Another problem.
Yeah. Our advisors are doing this all the time. In fact, more than I even realized, based on a conversation I had a few weeks ago with some of the advisors. They're going in and talking to franchisors on behalf of the clients and saying, here's what we want to see in the development schedule. Here's where they're interested in territories. This is what works for my client. Does it work for you? And if the answer is, we're sorry, it doesn't work for us as a franchisor, no problem. Capital T, time out. We're moving on to another brand. Nobody says we have to get into that brand. There's lots of brands out there that meet needs. So when an advisor is in your corner negotiating really on your behalf, or at least speaking on your behalf to franchisors to make sure expectations are aligned, that's going to put you in a much better position.
Yep, 100%.
Good. Let's talk a little bit about unscalable systems. I got one story in mind. I'm not going to name names, but I will say it was in kind of a smoothie nautical bowl category. Years ago, I'm visiting one of these brands, And I go into this beautiful office, and this founder is very proud of what he's built. They had a good amount of momentum at their back, and they felt they were ready to go from here to way up here, right? They just were like, we are going to be the next big thing in this category. And quickly into the discussion, they start talking about how food distribution has been a struggle, and how they don't have appropriate supply chains to keep up with their existing number of locations. And so then we dug in and we said, okay, tell us a little bit more about how that's going to be solved if we come in here and help you scale. And they said, well, we haven't solved that yet. And right away, I got that feeling in my stomach, like, why am I here? I shouldn't have flown halfway across the country to come visit these people. This is not going to scale, right? I mean, we need to know if we are selling food or if we're offering, again, I mentioned it earlier, a weather-dependent service, or even if, I mean, vehicles and equipment oftentimes can run into supply shortages as well, right? All of these things have to have been looked at, and they have to have an ongoing plan for how it's going to support growth. If it's we will figure it out as the locations come, that is not a strategy that works.
Yeah, we've been picking on food quite a bit, and for obvious reasons. It's a complex business typically, but this is also, like you said, for service brands. You know, think about roofing companies or insulation companies. They have trucks, they have trailers, they have equipment, and we've seen this with those companies where they will grow so fast they cannot keep up production with trailers and trucks and whatever else. So to combat this, as a client, you need to be asking these hard questions and make sure your advisor is asking these hard questions. You might not like the answers. To your point, they may say, we'll figure it out or we'll be fine. I get this a lot with my clients. They're like, oh yeah, they said they're going to be fine. What if they open 300 locations? Are they really going to be fine? Nobody knows. So that's something you just got to ask those questions. Big time of supply chain.
Yep. I've been a franchisor in the nutrition space. And, you know, if you don't have your main product on the shelves, I had a franchisee tell me one time we went through a bit of a shortage, and he said, this is like a gas station being out of gas. Right. You can't be out of gas if you're a gas station. You got to have those things figured out. We spent a lot of money on a lot of smart people to make sure supply chain was always there and always available.
Yep, it's a big problem.
Yep. Let's talk a little bit about the next reason, which is state-specific licensing laws, or maybe industry-specific licensing laws. So what I mean by that is, think about the tree industry, right? There's tree franchises out there. You have to have certain licenses, state-dependent, depending on how high you want to go on a tree to cut it down, right? It's a dangerous thing. Think about construction or restoration. In fact, we were talking to a brand just last week that said, don't send me any leads in California unless they've got a contractor's license, right? These are the things that we already know about these businesses, and we won't waste anybody's time. If you're not already a contractor in California, we're not showing you that brand. Medical has been through a massive boom, medical, med spas, et cetera. And these oftentimes require medical directors. Well, if that franchisor doesn't know how they're going to connect you with a medical director, what you're going to pay that person, what that system's going to look like, it's a problem. So state-specific or industry-specific licensing laws can get in the way.
This one can also be frustrating for clients. So here's what I'll tell you here is that once you identify the brand, you'll want to contact the local agencies in charge of these regulations. That's the only way to combat that, because a lot of times the franchise brand will say, we got you covered. Once you sign the franchise agreement, we'll figure it out for you. You have to make sure in your local area, these things are accessible. And these things are that you understand the licensing requirements. So just make sure when you go through the process, and that's what our advisors do, they coach on this, is they are calling the local agencies and making sure they can get these licenses.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. All right, the last one that I want to talk about today is capital, access to capital, capitalization. And this one can be a little bit trickier to figure out. And here's what I mean. So in the legal documents, again, they're called the FDD. In the back, their franchisor is going to have to put a balance sheet, a financial statement. And they submit these FDDs to individual states. And some of the states are going to look at that and decide whether or not that franchise has the ability to offer the franchise opportunity to the people of their state, right? And so you feel like there's this inherent kind of built-in checks and balances, which is somewhat true. Now, what I have found that can be a little bit trickier in figuring this out is oftentimes a franchise company is a subsidiary of a parent company, right? And if the assets are in the parent company and not in the franchise company, you may go back and look at a balance sheet and the balance sheet looks weak or the financials look weak, but you continue to hear that the franchisor is strong. And the only way to get into that, you can't get access to their audited financials at the parent company. You can only get them at the franchise company. Is you got to know people like us or others, I suppose, that can dig in, that know the people at the business to say, tell us a little bit more about the capital that's available. This isn't usually going to be a problem for brands of substantial size. They've already got that economic model figured out. But if we're talking emerging brands, regional and emerging brands, we need to dig into the franchisor to understand where's the money, where is it going to be invested, how long can they invest it before their royalty sufficient to be sure our franchise clients are protected.
Yeah, this one's tough too because FTDs are typically filed once a year. Keep that in mind as well. Financials can pivot and change a lot within a year, especially an emerging brand that is going through a growth spurt. It can really change. So really for you, or what I tell clients is just ask a lot of questions to your point and make sure you have those hard questions with the executive team, and hopefully they give you some really good feelings around this. But those FTDs only get filed once a year. They change a lot.
Yeah, right. So again, having an advisor helps. Okay, there's other reasons that emerging franchisors may struggle, but I think those are some of the key categories. And again, I don't mean to paint at all franchising in any, or especially emerging franchising in any kind of avoid this. Now, if you're completely risk adverse, fine. We've got plenty of franchise brands in the inventory that are strong and established and certified and things of those nature, and we'd be happy to show those to you. But if you're the type of entrepreneur that you want the blueprint, you want the system, but you also maybe want to be a little bit on the forefront of these opportunities because it might get you more access to leadership, right? You have more influence with leadership. It might give you the ability to expand into larger, more locations. And, we all know that when we can expand into more locations, we're going to have a more EBITDA, more exit value, things of that nature. And it just kind of, it's fun. Sometimes working in an emerging brand is like, we still have a few things that we want to do or figure out or test. And if you're an early franchisee, you've got a lot of influence around that versus if you go and open something that's big and been around for a long time, it's just executing the playbook, which is all, it just depends on who you are.
Yeah, and this is why advisors are so key, is because they help identify a couple of things. You just said it, like what is your risk level? Most people don't know their risk level. They say they do, they really don't. So they get into the process and are like, oh wow, like this is a little more risky than I'm comfortable with. Other people, they will know their risk. I had a meeting with somebody the other day. They have 50 million in backing. And so they have a lot of sophisticated investors that are ready to invest in a non-emerging brand because they want something that's going to be a foolproof option. So they're looking at very, very mature brands. They're going to pay more for them. Their upside is not as big, but they're okay with it because they want to keep their money safe and they're not as concerned about that upside. So that advisor will help you understand your risk tolerance, and really everything you said, your preferences and all those things, because what you think you probably know, you don't know until you talk to an expert.
Yeah, growth strategy as well, which is interesting. A lot of times, and I just did it myself, a lot of people say, if you want to grow, go to an emerging brand, which is true. There's a lot of opportunity to grow. Now, here's another one that a lot of people don't think about. When there is a long-standing national brand that has been around for a long time, if you've figured out the model, there's a tremendous resale opportunity. In fact, it's the strategy that you and I were part of back in the GNC days, right? My core function back when I worked for a local franchisee, he said, we figured out this model. We want to go buy underperforming GNC stores. And Tyler, I'll tell you, we would go in and pick these things up for one-time, sales or less. I mean, people that were just like, I just want to get out of this lease. I just want out of the burden that is over my head. We would then apply a model of, like we talked about earlier, exclusive product, well-trained advisors, and really heavy local marketing. And like that, I'm talking in the matter of 30 or 60 days, we would have an extremely profitable and booming location. And why wouldn't you want to do more of that? So again, you got to kind of figure out, how do you want to grow? Do you want to grow all new territory, or do you just want to take over existing locations that are underperforming for whatever reason, apply a model that you know that works, and exponentially increase their sales and their profits?
Yeah, all great stuff there. Well, let's talk a little bit, Ryan, about how Franchise Sidekick can help in this process. We've talked about the advantages of advisors, but I think a lot of people listening to this probably just don't understand what we do fully. So let's just dive in. How do we help overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, I tell the team all the time, the number one most important thing that we can do for a client is give them information they cannot get on their own, right? We can't go in and operate a franchise for somebody, right? We can't go hire a manager for them. That's not what we do. What we do is we get them as much possible information about owning that franchise. So when they start operating it, there are limited or no surprises. As long as somebody knows that, they know the level of working capital they need. They know how to get customers. They know our franchisees happy. They know what, national conferences they need to go to or what franchisees they need to call. If we've done our job well, they know those things before they get into a business. So insider information, access to the right people is the number one most important thing, in my opinion.
Yeah. we're in this. The obvious thing is we're in this all the time. Like this is all we do. Our advisors are certified. They spend at least 2,000 hours per year doing this. We're not part-time. All we do is talk about franchising. My wife gets so annoyed with me talking about franchising because that's all I do, right? So we understand the industry really well. And we just have the little small nuances that we have heard from other people, or we just know what's going on. So that's invaluable. You can't put a checklist to overcome just the invaluable asset of listening and being around the franchising world all the time.
Yeah, you said something really important there. Not all franchise advisors, brokers, whatever they call themselves, are created equal. Right? Think about buying a home, or I'll use an example, buying a home. When me and my wife went to buy a home years ago, she had a friend who did it on the side, part-time, trying to make a little extra money as a real estate agent. We started to use her. And within 2 weeks, I'm like, this is not good. And, now all of a sudden we're working with somebody that's a friend and you're like, what do we do? But we were going to put ourselves into a situation where we weren't going to have access to look at the right homes or even know how to negotiate it. And so I had to have the hard conversation of, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work out. And then we just reached out to somebody that we saw on a lot of the advertisements, somebody that we knew had a local presence and a ton of homes sold. And we said, will you help us? And then she came in and the experience was completely different. So earlier when you said we put them through certification, they got to spend at least 2,000 hours. We also asked them to work with a minimum of 30 clients at a time, visit 3 franchise conferences, go through regular testing, get scores from their clients back, and have to hit a minimum of 9 out of 10 in order to stay on their team. Why do we do all that? Because this is the biggest financial decision of somebody's life. And if you're working with that side hustle or part-time broker, you're going to have a significantly different experience than if you're working with a certified franchise sidekick advisor. That's number one, most important.
And man, it's free for the clients. Like we need to talk on that real quick. We forget this sometimes. It's free for the clients. Like our services are free. We're paid by the franchisors and they're going to charge you no matter what. So they're either going to keep the money or they're going to give it to us in that scenario, right? So it's a no lose situation to work with an expert and the best possible expert you can find.
100%. Another reason that I think is really important, and again, I believe we are the only group that does this, is we've got technology driving every single step of the process to ensure people have the right funding, they've had the right legal review, they're looking at the right territory, we've met their expectations with the brand, et cetera. So I like to give examples, and we're moving towards the end of summer, so now I'm starting to think a little bit about the cold weather is coming in Nebraska, and I'm going to need to winterize my home. I've lived in this home for 14 years. I've winterized it many times. And every time I go to winterize it again, guess what I do? I pull out the list on my phone and I go check by check by check to make sure I do it. Because I know if I miss one, I'm going to have a busted pipe somewhere and I'm going to be regretting it, right? Now, if I didn't have that checklist and I just tried to do it by memory, those are where the mistakes happen. And so if you're ever working, again, with somebody who's trying to guide you into this very important, very difficult decision, and they're doing it off of their best guess or how they think the process should go, or if they're not showing you step 1 through step 63 that you need to go through in order to make the right decision, then you are opening yourself up for a potential mistake. Don't do that. Work with somebody that's got a proven process.
Yeah, great point there, Ryan. And honestly, we've implemented something we're pretty excited about. This is fairly new to Franchise Sidekick. And so it's a guarantee and it's something no one else does. So let's talk on that real quick. Like tell everybody about this guarantee. It's pretty cool.
Right. Well, just think about this process. So when you work with a franchise advisor, it's probably somebody that you don't know, right? And whenever this is true of me, whenever I'm working with somebody I don't know, immediately my trust factor is like, can I or can I not trust this person? And if it's somebody that's making a recommendation to me and then they have no skin in the game or they have nothing beyond after the recommendation, I'm inherently like, I don't know if I can trust this person. For instance, my financial advisor, every time he makes a recommendation to me, I say, how much of your own money do you have into it? Right? Why do I say that? Because I want to know if he really believes in it, right? We all know the measure of a person's opinions or recommendations are always about their own actions and whether if they would take it, especially with their money. And so we said, what can we do to kind of help alleviate some of the concerns around people saying we're just making a recommendation to them to sell a franchise and to make a commission? Well, we said, let's put that on the line. Let's put that commission on the line, right? We can't go in there and operate it for you. We can't hire managers. We can't acquire customers. We already talked about that. But if we do our job in the front end, if we get you the right information, we get you into the right opportunity, and we say, if this doesn't work out for you, we're going to put our commission on the line. We're going to put our commission back to you for that. It's not a reason to buy a franchise. I don't think you should buy a specific franchise just because somebody's going to offer a commission back, but it is one more notch on that trust belt that makes you feel a little bit better. And let me also say, it's not every franchise brand. It's not every brand that we have in our inventory. Not every situation has this type of a guarantee. It is for brands that we know have a long-standing proven method that have proven over and over again to be successful for franchisees.
I love it. This is something that's fairly new for us, but we've been doing it for a while now, and it's so incredible. In addition to that, we also have the exit value maximizer, right? So this is part when things go really well for you, we can help you sell that business, which is the best part about franchise because you have a great network. We've got a great network and we can get that sold for you at probably a higher multiple. So love that part of it as well. But yeah, the guarantee is fantastic. I'm so glad we rolled that out.
Yep. And I actually probably like the exit value maximizer even more because I think the exit of your business is the most important financial event of your life. And whenever you go to sell your business, you're faced with this decision of how do I market it? Who do I sell to? Like, how does this go? And if you're a Sidekick client, what we can do, especially the profitable ones, we can go back into our list and say, let us market this for you. We've got the largest consolidated list of franchise buyers of any broker group in the country, right? So if we can go and market that to that list, what are we trying to do? We're trying to create competition. What does competition do? It increases your price and gets you the best exit possible. So we are trying to figure out all these other ways that we can continue to stay alongside our clients and help them do what they want, which is live life on their terms.
I love it. I love it. Well, the takeaway here today is obviously buying a franchise. It's tough. It's not an easy thing to do. Rely on the experts, ask the right questions. Today was a lot about failure, but overall franchising is a huge win. The stats prove it, much higher success rates. And so I think my takeaway today is just ask the right questions, get that trusted person on your side to make sure that you don't have to go through any sort of failure in your franchising process.
Yep. I think my one point to sum it all up would be use an advisor. Use somebody that knows what they're doing. There's so many big decisions I've made in my life that I could not make on my own. I trust people that do it all day, every day. And that's what you need to do in buying a franchise.
Love it. Love it. Well, obviously you can find an advisor, go to our website, franchisesidekick.com, see us on social media as well. Always subscribe. But this is great today, Ryan.
Yeah, good stuff. Always appreciate having these conversations with you. Until next time. Thanks for joining us on the Sidekick Life, where we highlight true sidekicks, entrepreneurs who've got their customers' backs, solve real-world problems, and after helping enough people, get to live the life they've always dreamed of. We'll see you next time.